Yesterday, the Saints wrapped up their first practice out in Irvine, California. We're going to talk about that, and we're also going to break down the depth charts for the pass catchers, wide receivers, and tight ends. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. Normally, I wrap up the show with the practice reports, but I think it's kind of important we start this one off with yesterday's practice report, filming this Friday morning, and they practiced for the first time in Irvine yesterday, Thursday afternoon, really Thursday evening for us. They're 2 hours behind. And it was a lot of situational work. They were doing stuff like starting drives on the 35, working down towards the red zone, did some red zone work, some down and distance, stuff like that. They did have individual drills, team drills, but for the most part, it was kind of a shorter practice than normal. Kellen Moore even only spoke to the media 5 minutes after practice, like everything was shorter. And he mentioned in there, this was kind of like they wanted to get some work in, but at the same time, they're using this as a little bit of a reset after that hard scrimmage they had last Sunday of 126 plays, and then a couple practices after that, they took the day off, traveled, and it was just kind of, we want everybody to get acclimated, but we still wanted to get some work in today. Biggest takeaway is we're probably looking at an acknowledgement that Haener is going to be working with the threes, the number 3 quarterback. Yesterday was a sort of flip as the previous practice. Now, remember, 2 practices in a row, it was Rattler with the ones. But the second one, the last practice they had prior to yesterday, it was Rattler with the ones mostly. But at the end, Shuck came in, who was running with the twos, got a little work with the ones. Flip that. Shuck ran with the ones. And at the end, and I believe they said it was some red zone work, Rattler, who had been running with the twos, came in and got some work with the ones. So seems like that starting job's probably starting to narrow down between Shuck and Rattler for the 1 and 2 job, with just the outlier going. So got some practice left to go and some preseason games. That could still change, but I think they're getting closer and closer to deciding what they want to do. Haener's work with the threes, he only took 5 passing snaps. Shuck and Rattler, Shuck took 3 times as many with 15. Rattler had 11, a little over twice as much. So this is just kind of indicating, and I think this is kind of why it was big news for a practice that not a whole lot comparatively to some of the previous practices that ended training camp in New Orleans. Some of the news coming out of there. They did have couple little blurbs. 3 defensive players did kind of get some mentions. Jalen Ford, who name was starting to come up in that scrimmage on Sunday, followed it up to yesterday with a really good practice. And they said Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry did really good work in coverage yesterday. So much so that the quarterback numbers were, in some cases, hurt by that a little bit. I'm getting the feeling what they're talking about is it was they made great plays on the ball as opposed to the quarterbacks or the receivers making a mistake. Although post-practice, Chris Olave was really hard on himself and said he had a terrible day. So all that with a grain of salt, but I think you're seeing a real competitive edge coming out in that wide receivers and defense back room, which is very, very good because we're going to need both groups to play really well. As far as availability, still 2 players on the pup, waiting to hear more, and we'll talk a little bit about that later with tight ends. Devin Neal was on the side doing rehab work. Rico Payton was out due to illness. Juwan Johnson did participate in team drills, so you might be able to pull that limited off his practice status. Not really sure. We'll see. And JT Gray returned yesterday. Seems like he's back in the fold. In a surprise move a couple of days ago, Matthew Hayball was released, and they brought back quarterback Hunter Deckers, who did do individual work but no team drills yesterday. Ross Jackson reported that when Blake Grupe was getting his work in, it was his turn to kick, that Burnip, our undrafted free agent, the first one we had, not the one we signed recently, he was doing all the holding. So I don't know if that means he's ahead in the job because there was really nothing about the punters other than that. Grupe, another perfect day, 5 for 5, hit from extra point, 39, 42, 45, 49. And California, they brought up California win was a little tricky yesterday, so for whatever that's worth. I think the big thing coming out of special teams was the returners. Kick returners, Rasheed Shaheed, Velus Jones Jr., Kendre Miller, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Cam Akers, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Dante Pettis. Working on punt returns, Shaheed also, Peoples-Jones, and Pettis with Alontae Taylor. So now, when we talk about receivers in a little while, I didn't mention Rasheed's return ability because it has nothing to do with him making the 53. We mentioned Pettis. Now I'm seeing, well, Donovan Peoples-Jones could have jumped in that conversation too. So he's getting some shots on returns because, as we talk about a little later, could be a difference maker for some of those spots on the back end of the depth chart. I noticed one thing on there that most of those guys are fast as hell, and quite a few of them are hard to tackle. So I think there is going to be a real emphasis on returns from Phil Galliano and Kellen Moore and those guys. So um, big news today, and you're going to see this before it happens, is there is a shorter version of a scrimmage. So they're not going 126 plays for practice today, this evening, tonight, whatever you want to call it. And it was after practice when media spoke with Kellen Moore, he confirmed that they are using the scrimmage as an extension of Sunday's game, as it's almost a combined evaluation between the two in an attempt to kind of even out the reps. So it's guys who scrimmage today may not play Sunday, vice versa. Some may, but the way Moore described it, it's basically two evaluation periods in one day. That's kind of all the same. They're trying to get the scrimmage as close to, without killing these guys with another 126 plays, close to kind of what the preseason game is going to be on Sunday, and use that as a total evaluation period. So some of our questions about the depth chart will probably get answered then in some way, shape, or form. So Monday's show, I expect to have uh, a lot to say about what went on, and are we reading how that 53 man is turning out, and probably combine that with a look at the running backs while we're doing it, because running backs are tough right now. We don't really know the breakdown, but we know Alvin won't play on Sunday, so usage on these guys, that, as far as where the reps are going, whether it be the scrimmage or the preseason game, may decide a lot of that, but that'll be coming up on Monday. Right now, we have to talk about pass catchers. So if we look at the Saints depth chart, and they did release their first official version as required by the NFL, but yeah, I don't know how much that really tells you outside of the people who we know are pretty much running with the ones that are going to be there. But at the same time, I think there may be some truth buried into it some kind of way. What we're doing here is it's kind of easy at first, and then it gets real tough after you get past what I'm kind of calling the big three. And at the back end, just to mention Chris Tyree and Mookie Dixon, they're probably looking at trying to make the practice squad. Um, I don't know if either one has a real shot at the 53-man roster. I would normally say they don't, but remember, Rasheed Shaheed was in that position just a couple of years ago, and he managed to pull it off. So, but I think right now they're more or less kind of actually down the depth chart, as it were. What the Saints released was at one wide receiver, Chris Olave, then Bub Means, then Kevin Austin Jr. On the other side, on the outside, Rasheed Shaheed, Mason Tipton, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and then the three receiver spot, we'll call it the slot, Brandin Cooks, Cedric Wilson Jr., and Dante Pettis. Yeah. Like I said, I think it gets real easy when you're talking about what I'm kind of calling the big three, that Olave, Shaheed, and Cooks are making the 53-man roster. I don't think any of the threes in any way, shape, or form in jeopardy. Um, you have very three similar receivers in stature. Olave and Shaheed listed around 6 foot. Brandin Cooks 5'10. Shaheed 185. Olave Cooks 190. I think you got three guys that can, no problem if they're playing the outside or the slot. That's why I'm saying the depth chart sometimes, even though we're calling them the top three, yeah, I think they're going to move around a lot when the Saints are in 11 personnel. They're all fast, explosive receivers. They're all vertical threats from the inside or the outside. Look, they all have great hands and instincts to go get the ball, which is, you know, half of being a good receiver right there. And the other half is the ability to run routes and kind of make even contested catches despite their smaller stature, which all three of those do have shown that ability in their NFL career. But I think you have three very talented receivers, and I'm calling right now Chris Olave the one and Rasheed Shaheed two, but I think I'm fairly confident that while Olave kind of showed up as the most polished receiver of the two, Shaheed's added a lot of polish to his game where either one could be a one or they could be a 1A and a 1B. And I think that may be the situation. It probably just depends on how Kellen Moore is going to scheme the offense and run it to who gets the volume. And it could be one over the other, could be equal. And I think Brandin Cooks could still get his foot in the door here because Um, he has a combination of both their games that he's had for a long time as a former number one receiver in the NFL. Probably can do it on a short term basis if we absolutely need him to. I think Shaheed, we mentioned this in a video about him a couple of weeks ago, getting a little bigger weight wise and adding muscle, but keeping his explosiveness now is really even in the playing field out between the three of them. They all kind of have their strengths. There's no doubt about that. And being as they're similar, their biggest weakness is probably height and the ability to really leap and get up and get the ball. Although we have seen Shaheed and Olave get up there and pull some balls down on overthrows that they managed to come up with a catch. So I think you got a lot of talent there. You got some considerable NFL experience between the three of them because now Olave and Shaheed, you put them in the seasoned veteran category, no problem. And of course, Brandin Cooks has been around a while. I think the only concerns you had about any of them is Cook still explosive? He's been in the league for a while and didn't quite put up the numbers in Dallas anybody was expecting last year, so there may have been some doubt, but nobody's brought that up in training camp. When you watch highlights and clips of what he's doing, yeah, I don't think there's really an issue there. He should be fine. He may not be the as fast as he once was, but I still think he brings a lot of speed and there's a lot to handle. Um, Around the NFL. Shaheed Olave is the injury issue. Now, Shaheed coming off that knee injury that knocked him out and put him on IR, and he lost the rest of the season from Tampa Bay, first Tampa Bay game last year. Appears to be fully healthy, nothing slowing him down. And like I said, he's come in a little heavier, a little stronger with the muscle mass, and looking to really improve his game in route running in the offseason and also um, the ability a little bigger and to be a little more physical with the ball once it's in his hands. Olave, it is the multiple concussions, and I think if we could just stay away from that, and I hope we do, because I don't know how many more he can handle. And this isn't about winning games or anything in 2025. It's for the young man's future career and everything going on after. So really hope that's not going to be an issue at all for both him and the team. So I think if you can get those three and you keep them healthy, you're solid. Okay. Like I said, lack of height, wide body, big body type stuff. Yeah, lacking a little bit there, but I think a little bit of that's going to come out to basically Kellen Moore. Can he scheme and play call around that ability? Because he does not seem to be too concerned about it. So it may not be as much of an issue as a lot of people, me included, thought going into the offseason. Going to like to bring in one guy with some some size at that receiver position. Where it gets real complicated real quick is when we're going to assume six, so 4 through 6 on the depth chart. Now it could only be five, but we'll see. Going into training camp, I kind of had almost inked Cedric Wilson Jr. in as the number 4. Now he gives you a little bigger body at 6'2", 197 than the other three. Um, he's had a 8-year career roughly in the NFL, 7 years, because he worked his way up from basically practice squad on Dallas to um, becoming their number 3 receiver. He was rookie in 2018, but really his numbers are looking at 2019 through 2021, when Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator at Dallas. And he got better every year number wise, but 67 catches, 137 yards, and 8 touchdowns in his career. The thing is, most of that came in 2021, which is his third year off the practice squad and kind of locking down that number 3 spot in the Dallas offense. He had a line of 45 catches, 602 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He didn't do much next 2 years in Miami, and equally didn't do as much last year with us as basically the number 3 receiver most of the year. In his combined numbers, the 2 years in Miami and the 1 year with us, 54 catches, 643 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Basically what he did in 2021 under Kellen Moore. And I think that was the rub. There was already talk early in camp about how excited he was to be reunited with Moore, how excited Moore was to get here and have Cedric Wilson Jr. on his roster. So I was kind of buying into that somewhat, going, he's a veteran guy. He's probably locking down a 4th spot. We'll see how it plays out in training camp. But I think you don't hear as much, or I haven't heard or have seen as much from him as I was kind of expecting. Listed him second behind Cooks in the slot, basically. I don't know. Now, it could, there's not could. We know, we've heard them both talk about it. There's a lot of trust factor between Wilson Jr. and Moore, but going back to those 3-4 years in Dallas when they were together. So that may buy him a lot of capital into making, if you're keeping 6 or 5 receivers, either way, might be able to sneak in there. I'm not as bullish on that as I was before training camp because, like I said, you're hearing some other names on this list a lot more than you're hearing Cedric Wilson Jr. And when you get past him, you're looking at it. It's kind of weird the way this breaks down because you have really 2 veteran NFL receivers in this mix. You have 3 young guys. Now, one of the young guys in Mason Tipton is very similar to the big 3 in stature and what he's going to bring to the table as a player. And the other ones are closer to Cedric Wilson Jr. as far as height and being a little bigger. When I was going through this, because I really thought I could throw a depth chart up there, and I was like, man, I honestly have no idea how this is going to play out. And this is one of the things, as I was doing this, I'm backing off the Cedric Wilson is 4, which I felt fairly comfortable at, is when I'm looking at Dante Pettis. Because Pettis kind of bangs out a little bit as Cedric Wilson does. A veteran receiver, 6'2", 200 pounds. He's got some size to him. 49ers, he was a rookie in 2018 to 2020. The Giants with 2020 and 2021. The Bears 22 to 24. They released him. We picked him up last year and was kind of instrumental coming down the stretch when all the injuries hit, not only in the receiving game, but also in punt returns. So he brings, and for the most part, in his time in the NFL, it's a very limited career, but almost in the same. He showed up in 2018 along with Cedric Wilson. His total line's 83 catches, 1,104 yards, 13 touchdowns. He's had 4 kick returns in his NFL career for 114 yards, so 28 and a half, basically 29 yards a return. 38 punt returns, 294 yards and a 7.7, almost an 8-yard per average. And he's listed directly behind Cedric Wilson. So kind of coming out of what they've done prior in the NFL to showing up here. So you're looking at Pettis and going, is this really a conversation? But yeah, it is. Donovan People-Jones would also 6'2", 204, very much in the same vein as the other 2. Another veteran receiver was with the Browns from 2020 to 2023. The Lions had him for a piece of 2023 and 2024, and we signed him in the offseason, and like Pettis, is bringing 122 catches, 1,895 yards, 8 touchdowns, bringing some veterans some real numbers. As a not a one, but a guy when you're looking at 4, 5, 6, going, there may be something there. Now you add two young guys in the mix, Bub Mean, 6'2", 215, and we talked about him in a previous video about guys to keep an eye on. Sad to say, he hasn't been making much noise in camp. He did in the last practice in New Orleans before they left to go to California, kind of the first time we heard from him. And believe me, after saying, man, I really like him as a sleeper making this team, I was looking hard and long to find anything on Bud Means, and it just wasn't there. Still has time, but I think the biggest thing, if you're going on film last year, and then Kevin Austin Jr., 6'2", 200 pounds, both of them had to step in to crappy situations. Means took full advantage of it because basically I think he played about 7 quarters of football. Coming in the second quarter, week 6 against Tampa Bay, and then getting hurt very early in week 8 against the Chargers. He put up basically 100 yards and a touchdown in 7 quarters. And having to do it straight off the bench because in that Tampa Bay game, we lost Olave and Rasheed in the first quarter or the first part of that game. Kevin Austin put up very similar numbers in his time, and he was buried on the practice squad until Darren Rizzi took over and made some changes. Lo and behold, he shows up, and it's like, man, where's this guy been? And I think both of them in very tough situations, being essentially rookies. In Means' case, definitely a rookie. He was taken in the 5th round. They stepped in and, lack of a better word, some big balls to come out there and do what they did in the situation they were in. Getting to this training camp, Austin has been making some noise. He is. I hear more and see more from him than I had from Means. So you kind of wonder where these two guys are gonna fall. Now, Means, a lot of injury history last in fact, full of injury history in his rookie year, still managed to have those, like I said, about those 7 quarters of really good football. He's apparently is healthy this year. We haven't heard a peep about anything going wrong with him, which is a great sign. But when you take those two and compare it to Mason Tipton, now Tipton, smaller, he is of the 5'11", 180-ish, like our big three, as I'm calling them, and an undrafted free agent, but he's got everything they have. He's explosive. He's quick. We saw in the preseason and in training camp last year a lot of catchability, run catchability like they have, adjusting to the ball in a deeper routes like they can do, but didn't see hardly any of it in the regular season in 2024. And outside of the Dallas game, I think that was the only game he missed. He was basically involved in the offense almost every week as compared to the other two when Austin Jr. and Means. So it has you scratching your head. But of everybody I'm talking on this list, he seems to show up the most so far in training camp, and has been mentioned specifically that he's developing some rapport with some of the quarterbacks he's been working with in the 2s and 3s. I think specifically Haener and Haener for the most part, and then Rattler when Rattler was running with the 2s. So I don't know how he plays into all this. I really think what it's going to come down to is 3 very important preseason games coming up for probably everybody on this list from Wilson to Tipton. Okay. I still want to say Wilson's got a bigger lock on that job, but I wouldn't bet a penny on any of this as who's going to make the roster. I think they all are still fighting it out in an evaluation period. But when I look at it overall, you 3 veteran starting receivers, where's the lean going to come in on those next 2 to 3 spots? Younger develop, older veterans. Where are we sitting on this? Because you're going with young quarterbacks and you're rebuilding the offensive line. We think the line's going to be okay. We just don't know till it gets live. And like I said, developing young quarterbacks, you never know where you're going to land on that. So putting a lot of young players, and we're talking about young players, Two of them are bookend in the offensive line, adding younger receivers out there, developmental guys who may have to get significant playing time, like Means and Austin Jr. had to do out of the blue last year. It's I do not envy Kellen Moore and the offensive coaching staff trying to figure all this out, because I do believe they all have some measure of talent. I do believe that they have the ability to play in the NFL. Um, Talking about the young guys, Means, Austin Jr., and Tipton, we already know what Wilson Pettis and People Jones can do. So I think this is, are we striking a balance? It's how many we taking, 5 or 6? Do we want to grab one of those young, promising developmental guys? We want to lean more heavy on the veterans to kind of help our quarterbacks and our offense out. And quite frankly, right now, I just don't know the answer to that. Now, I will say I don't know if this would determine anything, but if they like any of these young receivers, they might have to weigh the option of, can we run them through waivers and get them on the practice squad as compared to a veteran, say a Donovan People-Jones. I don't have a clue, but the Saints like to kind of have, in the past anyway, we don't know about this new look Saints, kind of played that game. Most of the time they win it, but every now and then we lose a guy because of that. So see it right now. 3 very similar receivers up top. I really think I probably should have put on there 1A, 1B, Olave and Shaheed. Cooks has got the 3 spot. I think Wilson Pettis may be a battle, with leaning towards Wilson just based on history. And then everybody else kind of trying to carve out their spots. So let me know what your 1 through 5, your 1 through 6 would be down in the comments, because man, it is extremely limited information outside of what I comfortably know, as I'm saying, the big 3 are going to be 1, 2, 3 on the depth chart. The rest of them, starting Sunday's game with the Chargers. So I'm saying they may have 3 very important weeks of practice and in preseason games to kind of determine that order. Kind of curious if I can do this in 5 minutes or under. I feel like I should comfortably manage that, because tight ends are easy. Um, I'm still leaving the Saints wide receiver depth chart up there, because I don't think this one needs to be put on paper. What it boils down to, Juwan Johnson's got to get healthy and stay healthy. He's one. Foster Moreau, who I'm starting to get disappointed in the fact that it sounded like coming out of OTAs and at times in camp when he was working on the side, that we might get him sooner than later. Well, it's getting later, because we're about ready to go in our preseason game, our first preseason game, and he's still not there. Regardless, he needs to get healthy and stay healthy. Jack Stoll is our number 3, kind of the blocking tight end, but it's been said several times by Kellen Moore since he was signed. He wants to get him more involved in the passing game, and we've seen and heard a little bit of that happening in training camp. So all 3 are vets. They know what they're doing. So even if Moreau has to take a little longer, I do not think it's going to, and he's been around, he's been there, so I don't think it's going to take him very long to get him up to speed. You're looking at, we think, again, another video from a few weeks ago, that 12 personnel, which is really becoming more and more heavy usage, replacing 21 and some of the other sets, not really carving into 11, which we just talked about receivers when you want to put 3 of those on the field. But you're going to need probably to carry 4 tight ends on the roster, and we're not carrying a fullback, so pretty sure that's the spot it's going to go to, especially when Kellen Moore was asked about that, I think it was last week, and he said, yeah, tight ends, a lot of what they do can handle what we need a fullback to do. And I think that answers the question right there. And of the top 3, Johnson's likely to be your move tight end. Moreau likely in line with Saul the majority of the time, but quite frankly, all 3 of them, I think you can use interchangeably, kind of depending on what you want to do, and also not tipping your hand, because Stahl constantly lines up in line. I think you're basically sending the strong message, hey, we're running the ball. Kind of want to avoid that, right? And I don't think Kellen Moore is going to have a problem with that. Now you get a little further down the depth chart. The name Michael Jacobson, okay? He is 28 years old. He's been around the NFL a long time. 2021, 2022, basically bounced around on some practice squads, the Colts in Seattle. We got a hold of him in 23, and we had him all of 2024 on our practice squad. So far he's having a really good training camp. I really putting his foot down is trying to grab that fourth spot. And he had a really good training camp for the most part last year in 2023, because I remember about this time when it started coming to making the roster and looking at the tight end group going, man, could they find a spot for him, which they weren't able to do. He stayed on the practice squad, which was fine. Never got a call up, which I always found interesting considering how the end of the season was running out, but it is what it is. Big guy, 6'7", 244 pounds. And this is the reason why people were excited on him last year. He showed good hands and the ability to go up and get the ball, and he's showing that again in training camp this year. I don't know much about his blocking, but good Lord, as big as he is, and if he's willing, more than likely getting in people's way and getting hands on them in some way, shape, or form will probably be enough, quite honestly. And I feel like he could probably do both those things with no problem. I think right now with Taysom Hill, not coming back anytime soon, I'm pretty sure at this point we know that four spot, that's his, I think. The real question is, who else is there? Because if you were playing a real game, this was opening week, getting ready to kick off on Sunday. If Johnson, because he's kind of listed day to day right now, and he's practiced somewhat limited basis at times, and they held him out at times, he could be your one. Stoll 2, Jacobson 3, and where are you going after that? And if Johnson can't go, Stoll's your primary tight end doing most of the work with Jacobson behind him, and really who you're going to after that. A couple of days ago, Seth Green, backup tight end, who was mentioned several times about not having a really good, strong camp, and then he did drop I believe, Shough touchdown pass in that 126 play scrimmage. He was cut, and we signed Mason Pline, who was recently released by the 49ers. I'm just going off with per Nick Underhill, what he threw up on Twitter, that he's basically a former college basketball player at Ferris State. I don't even know where that is. My apologies to Ferris State. And he did play some football for Furman in 2023. 6'7", 260. Another huge, huge guy. With some basketball skills, you're thinking he probably doesn't have too much of a problem going up and getting the ball and catching it, but we'll see. More than likely a practice squad candidate to replace Seth Green. But with kind of this uncertainty in the injury, you're missing at least two right now. They need bodies. And I think they figured, well, let's give this guy a shot. He's big and he used to play basketball in college. Let's see what we got with him. I think realistically, your only two options are Trayton Welch, 6'4", 240. He's an undrafted free agent in the Browns last year. They cut him at the, I think it was preseason, right at the end of preseason. We signed him to practice squad. He's been there ever since. And then our rookie seventh round pick, Maliki Mataval, 6'8", 263, another big body. We know, very athletic. He played 4 years at UCLA in college. The big rep on him was he got better each and every year in college, and was kind of draft profiled as, he's a prospect that's going to need some development, but he's got a very high ceiling if you can get him where you need him to be as an NFL tight end and get him to grow. Not an easy thing to do, because generally the rule of thumb, most NFL tight ends that aren't like super studs like Brock Bowers last year, sometimes takes about 2 to 3 years for them to really get kicked in. But we'll see. So I think right now he's sticking around, and he's blipped a couple times in training camp also with making a big catch coming from Haener or Rattler or Shough, whoever with the 2s and 3s. His names and highlights sneak in there every now and then. So right now, as it stands, until Moreau gets back and Johnson gets completely healthy, you probably look in your top four: Stoll, Jacobson, Welch, likely Mataval. Now, there's a certain degree of uncertainty there. But I think if you get the tight end room you want, which at this point, I'd probably lay bets other than being healthy, um, Johnson, Moreau, Stoll, and Jacobson. And I think you have a very solid tight end group there. Go back to the conversation we had a lot last year about the tight ends. You may not have that one Brock Bowers, Mark Andrews type guy in that room, but a good scheme with a good offense coordinator, play caller, and we're supposed to have that with Kellen Moore, can do what a lot of teams in the league do without a Brock Bowers because there's only one of him. Um, they can kind of manufacture that number one tight end out of two or three different bodies. I think we're going to have a really, really good chance of doing that ourselves. Missed the 5 minute mark, but I gave it a shot. That's it for today. Before we kind of do the outro, I do want to reiterate that my plan for Monday is kind of a comprehensive, I guess, wrap up, probably focus on how the quarterbacks broke down, but the reps and who did what in that combined scrimmage Friday, today, this afternoon scrimmage, and Sunday, and then take probably a harder look at the running backs. But that may change depending on what happens. One of the other position groups may jump in there, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be running backs. First time here, if you like what you saw, please hit the like, hit the subscribe. Um, Drop down in the comments not only about what you're thinking about wide receiver, tight end depth charts, but what you're kind of expecting to see maybe on Sunday. It's a preseason game. I know it's hard to temper expectations, but still, I'm just expecting to see a locked in group that's going to get some work done badly needed, and some guys who talked about receivers and tight ends in upcoming groups may be fighting for jobs really, really hard. So that's kind of what I'm guessing um, or expecting that I want to see, but we'll see what we see. So also, I'll put all around my head right now some of the videos, links to some of the videos I referenced earlier in this video if you want to go back and take a look at them. So, till I see you Monday, I'm Tim. Peace out and hoot at.